Robert, use the mic.
I have it when it's on. Does it, oh, I see. Here we go.
I'm on mute. Are we now we're good? All right. So, what we'll do at this point then is start with Senator Walls. He's right next to me. He gets pride of place here.
You started with me last time. I don't know if you want to switch it up, but
Well, on closing remarks, we'll start with Representative Kaufman.
Okay,
How's that sound?
Well, good morning, everybody. I am Senator Zach Walls, live over in Coralville in Johnson County. I represent the west side of Iowa City, all of Coralville, rural Johnson County, going up to Solon, over to eastern Johnson County, over to Cedar County, and the town of Wilton here in Muscatine County. It's always good to be with you. I really enjoy getting to represent the town of Wilton, and I always enjoy getting down to Muscatine Community College for these forums. Looking forward to the conversation this morning. I sit on the Agriculture Committee, the Education Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, which deals with taxes, and the Appropriations Committee, which deals with the budget. And I am the ranking member on the Education Budget Subcommittee, which is the committee responsible for funding our institutions of higher education, including our community colleges. In terms of priorities for the year, the kind of number one priority that I'm working on has to do with affordable housing, and specifically mobile and manufactured homes. I'm sure some of you have been reading in the paper or seen on the news some of the stuff that's been going on in our state, across the entire state. This is not just an eastern Iowa or southeastern Iowa problem. This is really something that's going on all over the state, with some of these out-of-state investment groups coming in and taking advantage of some very lax laws that we have in the state, and really making a big impact on residents. And in fact, I know that's actually happened right here in the Muscatine area very recently. So that's a big priority for me. We've had some fantastic bipartisan conversation throughout the interim, getting ready to come back into session here at the start of the year. We've got a great bipartisan working group, including some of the folks here at this table, who are having some really good conversations. Our hope is that we'll have a bill ready to be filed in the next week or two and get that process moving. Another priority in terms of the affordable housing is a bill for me that Senator Lofgren introduced to help make sure that we have more funds going to our affordable housing trust funds. I'm really grateful for Senator Lofgren's leadership on this issue. This is something that would be beneficial for every single county in the state of Iowa, making sure that we're getting a little bit more invested to make sure that housing is affordable, not just homes, but also apartments and other kinds of housing like that. So I'll turn it over to Senator Green, but good to be here and looking forward to your questions.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces every time we come up here to Muscatine. It's actually one of my favorite forums. You people are ask good questions. You know, you're attentive. You're here every Saturday that we can get up here, and I appreciate you showing up. I'm not sure how I got sitting next to this young senator here, but I'm one of the older ones in the Senate. But this is the way they drew it. Zach and I get along very well. We work together, and that's the way the process should work. Again, my name is Senator Tom Green. I serve all of Des Moines County, all of Louisa, and the rural parts of Muscatine counties. One of the priorities that I'm working on this year is we want to make sure we get medical cannabis over the finish line. I think the governor dropped the ball last year. She had some concerns about the dosage and the range that the prescribers can authorize. Well, I think that should be left up to the providers. I don't think that's a legislative issue. The legislature and the governor can set a range, but as far as the dosage, that's you leave up to the true professionals that are treating these conditions. And so I want to make sure that we get that finished and over the line. Another issue that I'm working on is a collaborative pharmacy agreement to help with the mental health issues. There's mental health issues and people in crisis mode all throughout our state and our nation. We've got to make sure that these people are taken care of. Besides having the funding there, I've got a bill that I've written up that allows the pharmacist to work with the prescriber in a true collaborative agreement that when a person is in a crisis mode, they need to be told, we can see you this afternoon or tomorrow, not we can see you in 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. That's just unacceptable. So we've got to make sure that those prescribers have free time to see those people that are truly in a crisis mode. Who else better to help manage their drug therapy than a doctor at a pharmacy? Between the University of Iowa and Drake University, we were going to graduate almost 200 graduates with a doctorate in pharmacy. Now, when you look at the interactions and the side effects of a lot of this medication, like I said, who else better to manage that than a doctorate of pharmacy? So this would be a true collaborative agreement, only agreeable if the prescriber and the pharmacist are in agreement on what they can do, recommendations. The pharmacist would not be changing medications. That's the prescriber's job. But he would be recommending. Let's say the patient says, I've got a cough, a dry cough, or I'm just so sedated. Well, the pharmacist can recommend to the prescriber changes or, reducing dosage or adjustments to help the patient manage their drug therapy. And I think this would be a positive step. It'll also be a cost savings for the state, too. So that's really two of the things that I'm really kind of working on. I'm going to pass it down here.
Could you get a little more busier over there, Tom? Sounds like you're filled up. Well, good morning. I'm Representative Dave Kerr. I represent District 88, which is the rural areas of Muscatine and Des Moines County and all of Louisa County. And I sit on the Ag Committee, the Appropriations, Public Safety, Education, and Chairman of the House Education Budget. So what's going on this year? I believe we'll follow a lot of the things that the governor put out. Child care, I will, and broadband will all be discussed. In what extent, I'm not sure, but it will be discussed. Been busy putting out a couple bills that pertain mainly to my district, 88, and one is who can sit on, or who is able to sit on a public health committee. For rural Iowa, I'm finding that, like Louisa County, cannot find a physician, and the code of Iowa says a physician needs to sit on it. We're going to open that up. There's some other counties that are doing the same thing, and we just need to bring them up to standard and make it legal that other people can sit on that committee. This week we were busy with SSA for the schools K through 12 funding. That'll work out probably next week or at the latest the following week. There's still negotiations going on at the Capitol on exactly setting that SSA. Transportation cost and pupil equity is also being discussed on it. Then my attention will turn to the higher education budget, which involves the regents, community colleges, and I hope we'll be able to fund community college. There she is back there. Hope we can fund community colleges very adequately this year. Iowa Public Television, Early Childhood Iowa, all these things are in that budget, and that's primarily where my attention will turn to pretty much for the next couple months, to tell you the truth. So that's what's going on with me, and again, thank you for inviting me up here today, and I'll turn it over to Representative Carlson.
Thanks, Dave. Again, I'm State Representative Gary Carlson. I represent House District 91, which is principally the city of Muscatine and Fruitland, Stockton, and a number of the rural parts of Muscatine County in that vicinity. So this year I continue as chair of the Commerce Committee. By the nature of Commerce Committee dealing with business issues, it's a broad spectrum of subjects. This year we'll have a number of pieces of legislation dealing with broadband with the intention of continuing to expand broadband access to Iowans. I think most of us will agree today that broadband is as important of an infrastructure item as roads and sewer and water and electrical power. So, and we have too many parts of Iowa that are underserved with broadband, and so we will continue to work hard on that. Insurance, anywhere as exciting as dynamic hedging and the consideration of derivatives for annuities. If you want to know more about that, see me after the meeting. You probably don't, though. There's some legislation pending in the utility industry, banking. There'll be at least one large bill on workforce development, which will be in conjunction with Future Ready Iowa. And will be some expansions, I believe, to the apprenticeship program fix a few gaps that we found in the last dollar scholarship program. That bill should be coming out on Tuesday, so it'll be open for additional discussions on that. In addition to commerce, I serve on Ways and Means, which is the bills that deal with tax legislation, economic growth, transportation, and this year was also added to the Labor Committee. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Lofgren. I'm in the Senate, and my district, I live in Muscatine, but my district's half in Muscatine County, half in Scott County. Gary's one half of it, and then Ross Poston, who's the Ag Chair in the House, is the other half of it. First of all, I want to welcome Eric Reeder, the new CEO from the Chamber, who's standing right over here. I don't know if you guys realize that. So I've heard some good things already, so good to have you in Muscatine. I'm on a lot of committees. I'm the chair of Economic Development Budget Sub. I'm the vice chair of Oversight. I'm on Education, Veterans Affairs, Local Government, Appropriations. A lot of interim committees between session. I'm on IPERS, the Iowa Economic Development Authority, Systems Retirement Plans. Gary's also on that with me. We look at all the different plans. Every 2 years, a couple of months ago, we went through the plans. I'm on Investor Iowa Task Force. I'm also on Homes for Iowa up in Newton Correctional Facility. We're building houses there. Basically, the prisoners are learning skills, how to build houses, and they're transporting them around the state, so I'm happy to talk to people more about that. I'm more of an advisor. I'm a non-voting member of that committee. And also, I would say mental health, the funding for the regions, I'm concerned about that. I'm not on any committees that deal with that, but that's something I'm really monitoring. Child care has become a really big thing. I believe that Senator Walz had brought that up earlier, and Charlotte Schaefer's here. Maybe she'll bring it up too while she's here. But the Association of Business Industry has, there was an article about how they support some changes, so we'll probably have some conversations about that. And then the companion animal bill that Ross Poston, he floor managed in the House, went over to the Senate. I do support that bill, and I hope we can get that passed. And then one thing to continue support for skilled workers. I know that MCC has been really involved with that initiative and a lot of different ones. Then also, one piece of legislation I worked on for a couple of years now is hands-free. So when you're driving your car, that you use technology. I'm a runner, and also I know a lot of cyclists. And what happened about 2 years ago, the Quad City Bicycle Group got a hold of me, so I put a bill in. And last year, we got it through transportation, and then it went to Ways and Means because there are some fines. And then it got kind of slowed up there. And so I'm still working on that. And what we kind of have is the Ways and Means chair doesn't support it that much, so there's another bill that's out there, so we're kind of working a couple different bills to try to get that resolved because of the safety issue. And then professional license reform, occupational licenses is an area that you probably heard a lot about, and I do support that initiative. And then I'm working on a bill called Land Banks, and to deal with a lot of the abandoned and dilapidated properties around the state. And then I have a bill in for a DOT bill to make sure that we have a representative from each district. Because right now, most of the people on the committee are kind of from the Polk County area. And so what happened about a year ago, I had somebody in Muscatine that had some interest to be in commission and didn't get on it. And as I kind of looked at it, I thought, well, this isn't very fair. So anyway, so I did put that bill in. I'm not on transportation, but I am monitoring that bill. Gary and I are working on a situation with an elevator in town, and if you want to know more about that, we can explain that another time probably. But then there was a bill called the Green Alert that had to do with veterans that they were concerned with their missing, and actually that went over to the House, and Representative Kaufman is still working on that for me over there. And dyslexia is something I'm concerned with because the task force came out with recommendations, and that's something they'll be working on. And then Senate Study Bill 3080 has to do with basically disruptive students in the classroom, therapeutic classrooms. So that's a bill that we may hear a lot more about. And so anyway, that's just a few, but I've got some other ones too.
Good morning, everyone. Bobby Kaufman, House District 73, Johnson, Cedar, and Muscatine counties. Even though I only represent the city of Wilton in Muscatine County, I went to Muscatine Community College, and I used to work in the city. So I always considered Muscatine to be kind of an adoptive part of my district. Before I get started, I'm proud to announce that I've been named as John DeBeat's favorite Republican. And John, I'd like you to choose right now publicly. Who do you like better, Dad or I? Thank you. Okay. Just wanted to make that clear for all your students. I'm sure we'll get into more details on the education funding proposal. It's a $108 million increase, a very significant, robust, affordable increase that House Republicans have proposed. And of course, we'll talk about community college funding. But in my opening comments, I wanted to discuss the things that I have direct control over, which is the state government committee that I chair. We have a wide jurisdiction and oftentimes get into topics that I never dreamed I would become knowledgeable on. So I just want to go through that list. One of the top priorities I have is helping our EMS ambulance services. There's a lot of confusion in the election code process for them that we're trying to get clarified, as well as establishing some funding mechanisms. We have a bill on the bottle bill, a long-held debate in the Capitol. We're the committee that has the governor's occupational licensure reform bill. I've got a bill from the peace officers and firefighters regarding their retirement. Senator Lofgren talked about the animal cruelty bill that's in the Senate. We have a second one coming over from the House, which was brought to us by the Veterinarians Association. Right now, if a veterinarian suspects that you're repeatedly abusing your cat or your dog or your pet, they can't report that. They are prohibited through patient confidentiality from reporting that suspected abuse to law enforcement. And I've said it time and time again that if you've got the personal wherewithal to be able to torture or beat a cat or a dog, you're probably going to graduate to human beings at some point. We get a lot of the department bills. So the different departments, like the Ombudsman's Office, which is the state mechanism if you want to file a complaint against an elected official. We have some whistleblower bills, the Secretary of State and his election bills, and the Department of Revenue. So it's a very wide-ranging jurisdiction. That's the things that I have direct control over, but looking forward to your questions and happy to answer any of them. Thank you.
Okay, if you have a question, let's see here. I don't know if you can hear us. Okay. Please step to the microphone and we'll answer you in order if you have questions, and we'll start with Brandy.
Good morning. Brandy Olson. I'm General Counsel and Director of Legal and Regulatory Services at Muscatine Power and Water. Was very happy to hear Representative Carlson bring up broadband, so he's probably not surprised that I'm up here. Considering the governor and the state's goal of and desire to expand broadband throughout rural Iowa, I'd like to know what your positions are on SSB 3009, the MediaCom bill that would essentially make it impossible for communities to have municipal broadband and bring internet service to their own communities. In Muscatine, we recognized this was a problem 23 years ago and created a municipal utility to bring high-speed internet to the community, and it's served us very well. So I'd like to hear your positions on that.
This is the first time I'm hearing of it, so I'm just going to take the description that you put at your word, because I trust you, and that would be a terrible bill that I wouldn't support. But I'm not sure who brought it forth or why it is done, but taking away that access from local communities wouldn't be something I would support.
Thank you.
Pretty much what Bobby said. I agree with everything.
The bill originated in the Senate. I think they're afraid to bring it to me, Randy.
I appreciate that.
So I would anticipate that bill will come to Commerce and it will not proceed.
Thank you.
I'll leave that up to the man that knows about that bill.
Brandy, what was that bill number?
SSB 3009. It is in the Senate Commerce Committee. It's assigned a subcommittee right now.
Okay. Like I said, it sounds like a no-brainer.
That's fine. I sent you an email
really
on it earlier this week, too, just a day or so ago.
I appreciate that. I'll look into it. But
Thank you.
It doesn't sound like anything that would benefit the majority of the citizens.
Certainly
So that's
not
kinda
rural
hard.
Iowans, for sure.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah, I concur with everything that we've said here. I was glad to hear the governor call for $15 million in her budget for new investment in rural broadband. I think that number could be even higher to the extent, and I think we all agree that broadband is a critical part of infrastructure for the future of our state. We obviously have to make sure that the federal government is doing its part as well in contributing in that direction. But the idea that we're going to take opportunities away from communities to provide this infrastructure just seems like a non-starter.
Thank you all for your commitments.
Thanks, Brandy.
Don Paulson.
Good morning. I'm Don Paulson. I live in 76 Township. Just wondering, will the legislature return Medicaid services back to state control this year?
It won't, but it should. I think, we saw, I was at Iowa Total Care was denied payment of $44 million by the governor for non-service, over services that were not provided. I continue to believe that the Medicaid privatization has been a failed experiment. At this point, I think that the path forward that makes the most sense right away would be to carve out parts of the populations that should be in these state control. So we're talking about long-term care. We're talking about folks with intellectual disabilities. Unfortunately, I don't think that will happen. If it did, I would vote for it. I think that I've even co-sponsored legislation to require that. And to be clear, by the way, the governor, this is totally at her discretion. If she decided tomorrow that was the direction that she wanted to go, she has that authority as the governor to do that. She is not, it's not clear to me why. I understand that this was not necessarily her idea. I think this started with Governor Branstad. But the decision to move forward with privatization in the way that we did, to be clear, folks, managed care, this privatized system, in fact, has worked in other states. The problem in Iowa was that we put our entire system into this instead of carving out some of those dedicated populations, and that's why this really has not been working at all. I get emails about from both providers on the kind of the doctor side, people who aren't getting paid, as well on the patient side, folks who are not getting their claims approved. So it's still now, I think we're 4 years in, still lots and lots of big problems that aren't being fixed.
I really agree with a lot of the things Zach said. I was a pharmacist before I became a state senator, and I've always considered myself a patient advocate. And like Zach said, there are certain parts of the population that need government assistance. They just need it. They're not in managed care. The basic philosophy is that we can manage them and get them better, and they will get off state assistance. Well, that's true for some, but not for the majority. For the majority of citizens who need our help and our financial assistance, we've got to do that. I've been a patient advocate all my life, all my professional life, and I will continue to do that. The bottom line really to me is payment. How are our providers getting paid for the services they're giving to our citizens who need that assistance? When provider funding is restricted or reduced or eliminated or delayed, patient care suffers. And we've got to do what we can. If we consider ourselves a compassionate society, we've got to take care of those less fortunate than us. That's, to me, is the bottom line. And that's how I will continue to vote.
Don, I don't believe we're going to do anything on it, but I do see some discussions going forth on exactly what needs done, where we want to end up as a state, tell you the truth. And I look back, I wonder if the problem just wasn't, to start with, underfunding to the whole thing to start with. But I haven't researched that enough, and I really can't say that's the problem, but or one of the problems. But quick answer, no, I don't see it.
Thanks, Don. I do not anticipate changes in managed care. The issue on the $44 million held back was on timeliness of paying for services, not that the services were not offered. So just for clarification, and just to argue a bit with my colleague Senator Green, I would say that the vast majority of people are not in the medically fragile. It's a relatively small percentage of the people. We clearly had a problem with the medically fragile as far as the reimbursement rates, and we changed that 2 years ago, and it made a huge difference. I worked very closely with the people at Harmony House, the service providers there, but what was the issue at Harmony House was the issue that was statewide, and we made a dramatic improvement in those reimbursement rates. The vast majority of people in the expansion of Medicaid are also children, and they are not in the medical fragile, but it is, I mean that there are some, but the vast majority are not. And the key there is to provide them, children, good health care early on. So the Hawkeye program, which all comes under that as well, is a very important and supportive program. I believe it's appropriately funded.
I also doubt that there'll be a change, but I understand why they did it. The cost of Medicaid was going up double inflation and just really going up a lot. Now, of course, I think Senator Walz had already mentioned that none of us here had voted for that or anything like that, too. So, but I had quite a few meetings between session discussing it and talking to providers and everything, too, so I know there's still a lot of problems.
Just to echo what everybody said, Don, none of us voted for managed care up here. It's an executive decision. I think there needs to be some changes, particularly carving out the long-term community, but I would concur with what Representative Carlson said, that a majority of the people that are on Medicaid are not in a fragile state. I want to dispel some myths. There's this myth that if you go back to the old system, it's going to be puppies, peace, and rainbows. The old system had big problems. The old system was growing at a yearly rate, a larger amount than our entire budget that funds our prisons and our corrections facilities. It's $125 million. That was an unsustainable path that would begin to negatively impact things like water quality, mental health, law enforcement, education. So the choice isn't go back to the old system and things are going to be good, or stick with the new system. That's not a choice that we have. So I continue to work with individual constituents. I have so far not been unsuccessful in helping anyone that's asked as far as getting their needs whole, and I will continue to do that, but I also believe there can be some improvements to the current system and would be very open to those.
Thank you.
Hey, good morning. My name's Chloe Pethat. I'm here representing the college, MCC Young Democrats. And I know you guys kind of mentioned this in your intros, but where do you guys stand individually on the funding for community colleges and what you guys hope to achieve this year?
Great question. The governor's budget came out with the proposed $5.2 million increase. I don't think that's enough. I think you're going to see the House have about a $7.5 million increase, so looking to increase her proposal by about 50%. Everyone up here goes to bat for this community college and all community colleges, and as a graduate of this one, I have always got a special place in my heart for MCC.
I went to MCC, so obviously I support it, but I'm not sure where the Senate is. Maybe the other senators know, but I don't think we've come up with our number yet. But again, the governor's at 5.2, and I know the House is higher than that. So but it's still a little bit early in session right now to know where we're at.
Yeah, so the governor, 5.2 was the increase. Let's make clear that's not 5.2 million. 5.2 million is the increase in funding for the community colleges. And yes, in the last few years, the House has probably pushed a little harder on funding for, well, I shouldn't say probably, the House has pushed harder for funding for community colleges than that's been done. But also there's been funding that's come to community colleges through other programs. Probably the one that's the most helpful is Future Ready Iowa, because of last dollar scholarship programs, which are to help students. A lot of times these are adult learners and getting involved, helping people go back to school to get additional certifications or different degree programs. And that is focused clearly on getting a certification or 2-year degree program. So those scholarship dollars are also a help to the community colleges more than any other education institution. And I suspect we will now put some more money into that. We will open that up so that even more apprenticeship programs and training programs can be established, which is also very helpful for the community colleges because many of them work closely. And we have a program here in Muscatine, which is the Community Foundation. I thought I saw Charlotte here earlier. There she is. Okay, Charlotte. All right. And, of course, Naomi from MCC is here. Of a very creative program. In fact, the governor was here to learn a little bit more about that program to help with people that have some specific socioeconomic areas to get additional skills so that they are then capable of earning even more wages for their family. And I think that there is some targeted approaches on these training and apprenticeship programs that the Last Dollar Scholarship and other programs can be used for Future Ready Iowa. So I think it bodes well for the community colleges through the different pots that will come, not just the traditional increase in the funding, but also through things like the Last Dollar Scholarship.
I believe, excuse me, I believe Gary, Representative Carlson, explained the scholarships and the Last Dollar Scholarship, which is vital to community colleges. This will fall under my budget, and like I said, in about 2 weeks, I'll really get started in on finding what the House caucus has for a number that they would like to see the community colleges increased. The governor, I think, is a little low, and I'm sure the House members will up that. But I've got to get a whole sentiment of ideas on where Representative Carlson, Representative Kaufman, and a whole bunch of us think they need to be. And I'm probably the oldest graduate here from MCC, so I will be looking out for the community college to get as much money as we can appropriated to them.
Well, Representative Kerr and I are kind of unique. We have two community colleges. We have Southeastern Community College in West Burlington, and then we also represent, obviously, Muscatine Community College. Naomi, thank you for letting us hold the forum here. It's always refreshing to get up here. But when I've talked to Dr. Ash, Michael Ash down in West Burlington, he tells me their greatest challenge is students. Their enrollment is down. Naomi, is your enrollment staying fairly... Little down also. Yeah. Well, you know, I think when we get the message out to our students and our young people that the community colleges is really the best bang for your buck. You can get quality education, you can get skilled job training at all of our community colleges, and you know, this is the way to go. Like I said, I was a graduate of at the time Burlington Junior College, and then I went on to Drake University in Des Moines for my pharmacy degree. But I've always felt, and I believe the numbers prove it out, that more Iowa students are educated at our community colleges than they are at our regent schools. So, you know, like I said, this is the best bang for your buck, and we can get our students to stay at home. A lot of our young students, man, they want to get out. They want to get out to the big schools and experience life. But, you know, I told all 4 of my kids, I'll help you with 8 semesters of education and 1 wedding. And that's where I got to draw the line. With 4 kids, I had to draw the line somewhere. So that's kind of what I told them. And a couple of them did, but this is the best place to get that education money well spent. With the state's economy on the upswing, the national economy on the upswing, we're going to have more money that we can allocate to our community colleges. So as long as the economy is rolling and growing, we're going to have more money for our local entities, schools, counties, community colleges, and that I see continuing. So let's just keep it rolling.
Well, thanks, Chloe, for the great question. It was excellent having some MCC students at the Capitol a few weeks ago, and I think I see some of them here right now. So in terms of your question, my younger sister is actually currently a student in a community college. She's at DMAC over in Des Moines, taking some chemistry classes. And I'm on the Education Committee, Budget Committee with Representative Kerr. This is a big focus for me. I also just want to briefly echo Representative Carlson in terms of the job training, the Last Dollar Scholarship. There are a couple of small tweaks. You know, every time you pass a law, there's some things in there you got to go back, make a couple small fixes. We're going to do that on a bipartisan basis. I'm also hoping to work with Representative Kerr and our committee on maybe making a few changes to some of the job training programs. There are a few small changes we could make that could actually help us pull down more money from the federal government that's currently available and that we're leaving on the table, so I'll connect with you after that. And then the one thing that we were able to do last year that I was really excited about, so I represent Kirkwood Community College in my district in addition to MCC. What I was hearing from my folks at Kirkwood was that they had a really long waiting list for adults who were trying to take English as a learning language. I don't know, Naomi, is that something that you see here? Not as much? Not as much. It was. I know it was a big issue in Kirkwood, and then we did a survey of community colleges across the state, and it turned out the waiting list statewide was well into the thousands of adults who wanted to learn English, wanted to be better integrated into their communities, but they didn't have access to the classes because we didn't have enough funding. And so we were able to work together on a bipartisan basis to help provide some new money to help clear that backlog a little bit, which is good for those adults, helps get them into the workforce, off of government assistance, integrated into the community, and it's good for our employers who, as we all know, are looking for workers right now. So that's something that I'm hoping we're going to be able to take another bite at that apple this year. And then another really important role that our community colleges are increasingly playing is with concurrent enrollment. Any young folks in here take concurrent enrollment when they were in high school? A couple of folks. Okay, so like that is a big part of how places like Kirkwood, places like MCC are offering their services directly to high school students, so that when the time they graduate, they've actually already got several college credits when they get into school. So that's really important, and we got to make sure that we continue to support that. And the final thing that I'll say is that I'm also starting to look at over the next 10 to 15 years, where are demographics going as a state, and I am a little concerned about some of the things that we're starting to see on the 10 to 15 year horizon. The nice thing about an 18-year-old is that it takes 18 years to make an 18-year-old, and so given that we know how many 3-year-olds there are running around the state right now, we know about how many 18-year-olds we're going to have in 15 years, and the numbers look like we might be in a little bit of trouble. So if we can't figure out how to recruit more people to come to Iowa, our community colleges and our region schools and all of our private colleges are also going to be potentially facing some real challenges. So I think it's important for the legislature to take that long view and to start getting out in front of that problem to make sure that it's not a crisis in 10 to 15 years from now.
I agree.
Thank you.
And we usually take a break about halfway through the proceedings. So what we're going to do is, Charla, we're going to go ahead and let you give the gentleman who's ahead of you. The rest of you, go ahead and sit down, and you can come back after the break in the same order you're there. So I recognize the gentleman.
Thank you. My name is Melvin Duo, student of Muscatine Community College and National Government class. I first want to know how the bill became a law, and also please explain to me as a student of national government how the process of the bill goes from introduction to an enactment. And then lastly, please give me an explanation as an Iowa Congress people how the President Trump last released to an immigrant last year, whether it's a political will or a long-term process about it.
I'm going to interrupt a second. This is state government. I ask you confine yourself to issues on the state and not on the federal level, because these people don't vote on the federal level.
Oh, okay, sorry. Then can you please explain to me how the process of the bill become, from the introduction to an enactment, please?
Well, first of all, thanks for the great question. We appreciate it. The Iowa legislature is definitely different from the U.S. Congress, but the actions that we take at the state capitol does have an impact on the national Congress and vice versa, right? The decisions that they make impact us too. So I don't think that your question was out of line. In terms of how a bill becomes a law, there are other lawmakers up here who have been serving for a lot longer than I have and can probably walk you through the process a lot better than I can. But I would say the most important thing to understand about a bill is that just because you introduce a bill doesn't mean that it becomes a law right away. There's a long process that it has to go through, and I don't know, who up here's been in government the longest? Gary, is that you? Bobby?
Let me just, for Representative Carlson talk. On the bill that I talked about earlier about the public health, getting more people on a board, that really originated from the Louisa County Public Health Board in a need that they had to fulfill an Iowa code. So I took that and had the bill drafted, took it up to the staff, and they sent it on to the bill drafters, and they got it back, and it was the way I wanted it, so that's why I introduced it. So, but the bill process I'll let Representative Carlson talk about.
So a bill can come from any legislator, and there's 150 of us, and most of us collect those ideas from our constituents. So just as the example Dave mentioned was the public health. It could be an association, it could be an individual, it can be a city government, county government, whatever. So we take an idea and work with staff who then turn that over to Legislative Services Agency, which is a nonpartisan group that all legislators use to actually draft the law so that it goes appropriately in the right code of Iowa and is consistent with the other parts of that chapter of the code. When the bill comes back from Legislative Services and that the idea agrees with then now what the legal language shows, the bill is then introduced and it gets a number. Those numbers may change as the process goes forward, but it's assigned a number, and after that, those numbers tag it along through the process. If the bill looks like it has merit, then it will move forward, and the first one is through, it goes to a committee, and the committee will assign a subcommittee. The subcommittee generally is 3 legislators who then hold a public hearing on that bill, and that's where a chance for the public, and all of the legislation, all the bills that are proposed are available online at any time. So all Iowans have access to see what the proposed legislation is. The public hearing is a chance then for the public to speak about that bill. Are they for it? Are they against it? Are they monitoring it? What is their position? The subcommittee makes a determination whether they believe the bill should go forward. They may move it forward with amendments, or they may move it forward with the idea that amendments may be forthcoming. The next step of the bill process is for the chair of the committee to bring that bill forward to the full committee. So as I mentioned, I chair the Commerce Committee. So it would go from 3 legislators to 23 legislators who would spend more time in debate on that particular bill. If the Commerce Committee members, the majority of them believe that the bill should move forward, they would pass it affirmatively from the Commerce Committee, and then it goes on to the calendar for the House consideration. Then it is discussed by the caucuses in both parties. So all the Democrats would talk about a bill that's on the calendar, and all the Republicans would talk about that bill, and you're talking about the bill, educating the other legislators on that bill. We all have copies of it, but there may be questions and nuances. If there's enough support for that bill, then it would go forward. In the case of the House, it would be on the House floor. If the bill passes the House of Representatives, then that bill goes over to the Senate. And essentially the Senate repeats the same process. They have a subcommittee. They have a public hearing. They have the full committee. They have to make a determination for the bill on the Senate floor. If they would pass it, and by chance, if they happen to match, okay, sometimes they don't match. The Senate will put an amendment. If they put an amendment on that didn't match the House bill, then it comes back to the House, and the House has to consider whether that amendment is acceptable or not. And so sometimes there's a little bouncing back and forth. But ultimately, if a bill passes both the House and the Senate with the identical language, then it goes to the governor, and the governor will either accept the bill and sign the bill, or the governor could veto the bill, and then it would have to go back through a regulatory process in the Senate, in the House, to consider whether we will vote to override the veto. That's it. That's a Cliff Note version.
Nice and easy. That's a short version.
I might add to that, Walter.
Yeah, sorry about
What
that.
can be frustrating is you'll have something that's unanimous in the Senate, and you send it over to the House, and then they don't even have a subcommittee on it, and vice versa. So like I said, it's that. Yeah, it happens. It goes both ways. Yeah.
Anyone else from the panel? Here, you can use this.
Representative Carlson described it perfectly. For the sake of time, we'll just...
Oh, I'm going to give you this, too. Very good. All right. There you go.
Was it Melvin? Is that your name? Melvin, the one piece that I would say that a lot of folks at home, and frankly I did not fully realize when I got to the Senate, was at how many steps a single person controls the fate of this idea. There is the subcommittee, there is the committee chairperson, and then there is the leader of each individual chamber in both the Senate and in the House. And one person at each of those phases can decide this is not moving forward, it's over, it's dead. And sometimes the person whose idea it was back in Muscatine or wherever has no idea what that person's name is, who has like total control over this bill, has no idea why something got stopped. And even the person who filed the bill, sometimes a bill gets killed. And, you know, Senator Lofgren mentioned earlier his hands-free idea, you know, got stopped, and you might not even know why that happened. So there are a lot of different processes where even if a bill has very popular support, a lot of people in the chambers like it, it cannot move forward for whatever reason. I think that was a big surprise for me when I got to the legislature.
And the governor.
And then, of course, the governor, who, you know, a great example of that on the medical cannabis issue last year. It passed the House, 97-3, passed the Senate 45-5, and then, you know, one person vetoed it. So, again, lots of different choke points where things can go wrong.
Now, one thing where there's absolute control in one person is calling a recess at this meeting, and we'll reconvene at 8 minutes before 10 o'clock, and the people who are in order there, starting with Charla Schaefer, will be recognized in the same order they were in before.
She may very well been. Okay, that's fine. I don't see Cheryl's back here. Okay. All right. Can you all take your seats when you start the show again? Somebody have an aerial flare I can shoot off to get people back, you know? I'm ready, but the question is, can everybody please take their seats so we can start? All right. Sarah, go ahead and ask your question. The chair recognizes Sarah Landy for a question.
Hello, this is Sarah Landy from Muscatine. Thank you all for serving, and it's really been an educational meeting so far. No one has commented on the Invest in Iowa program that would involve an increase 1 cent in the sales tax. So I'd like your comments on that. I'll have to say I was very pleased to hear the governor support that, and one aspect of the Invest in Iowa and the 1 cent sales tax is, of course, funding the I Will. The 3/8% of that 1 cent would go to fund clean water and outdoor recreation, which I think is a key factor for recruiting good people to Iowa. So I like to encourage you to support it, and I like to know where you stand on it. So thank you.
Well, hi, Sarah. I know we chatted about this as we walked in, so I'm glad that we got a question on it. I was excited initially about this. The Iowa was the very first thing that I voted for as an Iowa voter. Back in 2010, that was my first election, and I was really excited to vote for I Will. I'm a Boy Scout, grew up in the outdoors, spent a lot of time hiking and canoeing and all that good stuff. So I was really supportive of that 3/8 cent. I do not support the governor's Invest in Iowa Act as she outlined it in her condition of the state speech, because it's not actually investing in Iowa. She said that she wants it to be revenue neutral. And so what that means is we're going to raise the sales tax, and then we're going to have income tax cuts and property tax cuts to pay for it. So we're not actually investing new tax dollars into these projects. We're moving money around. We're shifting money around. And the thing about the sales tax is that everybody pays the sales tax. Whenever you buy anything, you're paying that 6 cents would be 7 cents. In a lot of places it'll be 8 cents because you got the local option tax too. And so now everybody's paying that extra 8%, and then you're seeing folks have their income taxes cut, but there are a lot of folks who don't pay income tax because they don't have income. If you're on Social Security, that is not taxed in the state of Iowa. So if we raise your sales tax, but we cut your income tax, well, all that happened was we raised your taxes and there was no income tax cut. Now, you're not always going to hear me up here defending, or arguing against raising taxes, right? I do believe that government can make wise investments, and that's good. We talked about broadband earlier. That money doesn't come from trees. You got to raise taxes to pay for it. But I don't support making the tax code more regressive, which means raising the taxes on the people who can least afford to pay those taxes. Currently in the state of Iowa, if you look at the percentage of income that is paid to taxes, it is the people who make the least amount of money who pay the highest percentage of their income to those taxes. And this proposal from the governor will make that problem worse and not better. And so if she is willing to have this 3/8 cent increase, but she's willing to also make expansions to things like the earned income tax credit, which would put more money in the pockets of folks who are in those lower and working classes and in the middle class, that I would support. And then making sure that we're making these critical investments in Iowa, which again, I voted for. I'm a big believer in it, and which we should happen a lot sooner than right now. But at least my understanding of the governor's proposal, we don't have legislation yet. My understanding is that we'll see legislation in the next week or two. Once we get that legislation, we'll all take a closer look at it. But at the moment, I've got a lot of big questions and a lot of red flags.
I'm always worried about an increase in taxes, and yet somehow that money is supposed to go this way, but it ends up going this way. It's got to be dedicated. If we're going to raise taxes, it's got to be dedicated to a specific fund, and it better go there. Because quite often we've seen where the outdoor projects, the water quality projects, the funds are supposed to go there for this, but somehow they just don't get there. That's the greatest con game out there, I think. I have a problem with that. So as long as the funds are dedicated and they do go for these specific water qualities and outdoor recreation parts, then I can be supportive of it. I don't think anyone wants to say, hey, I'm for tax increases. We all have reservations there. I think I feel very good about what's happened the last 3 years. We came to the state, the first bill I had to sign was a de-appropriation bill, $258 million that we had promised to our cities, counties, schools that we did not have. We had to take that money back. You're not getting it this year. I mean, that caused ripples clear down to our community colleges, schools, everybody. Can't do that again. Last year, we went from a total overall state budget of about $7.2 billion to a little over $7.6 billion this year. So we had a $400 million increase in state revenue from sales tax and personal income taxes. More people are working without raising your taxes. We didn't increase the gas tax. We didn't increase your personal income taxes. So we've done this just with solid conservative principles of moving our government forward and spending your money responsibly. And that's what I will continue to do.
I'm not sure we're going to even move on this year. It's just my feeling. Yesterday I was in a discussion with three men, and they did not want the taxes, the 1 cent, put on to them to pay for it. They didn't care whether they was going to get it back on another way, but they said they've had enough. They want water quality to be better, and how we get there, they cannot even agree on the formula that's in I Will right now. Some said do away with trails. Some said had other ideas. So it's a right now I think it's a bill that needs a lot of looking at. I don't know what the gentlemen are going to say, but I think it's going to be a struggle to get anything done. That's my personal opinion, and from what the district I've talked to people about. So hold on, I guess, is all I can tell you, and we can figure it out in a month.
Well, Sarah, I'm still a little bit more encouraged. Okay, so I find it a little funny sometimes when the idea of I Will was established, and we talk so often about how people were for it. It was always predicated on the fact it was being an increase in sales tax. So the fact that we might be increasing the sales tax to fund I Will should not come as a shock to anybody. So it's a little funny to me sometimes now. People that were for it aren't for it because it's going to be an increase in sales tax. I do think since 2010, some of the needs have changed. There's other funding sources. There's other progress that's made. It will likely be, before it becomes law, there will be adjustment in the formula. But I think there are a number of legislators, and now with the governor, I think it makes a big difference when the governor also begins to get behind a concept. But it is talking about putting more money, dedicating more money to those natural resource areas, but also taking the other 5/8 rather than increase taxes. You think it's hard to calculate taxes today think about an additional 3/8 on your sales tax, okay? So we'll likely go to the full penny. And so then what is that other 5/8? There's a lot of discussion being discussed as to what should be what that other 5/8. I will tell you, personally, I'm advocating for that to be more money directed towards mental health, okay, and that we have a steadier stream of dollars for mental health. There are other ideas. My idea is not unique, nor is my idea overly acclaimed, but it is one of the items that we are discussing. But the fact that we also have a much higher income tax than most of our surrounding states, not all, but most. And if you live in western Iowa, that's a very competitive issue, especially compared to South Dakota. It has no state income tax, and Nebraska has less, and North Dakota has less, Missouri has less. So can we then do some shifting to get some reduction in income tax as a result of sales tax increase. I think that is worthy of some good discussion. We'll see where it ends up, but the fact that the idea is front and center with the governor proposing that, I think it will be of great interest. But as you can already see, with just 4 of us, there is no consensus on idea, and I think today we have 150 ideas in the legislature.
The ag community doesn't like the formula, so I know they're still discussing that. So the 1 cent would be $540 million. I do like they're talking $80 million to mental health, which I'm all for that. I'm still concerned, obviously, because if we look at all the states that surround Iowa, if we raise it 1 cent, we're going to be right. I believe we're going to be the highest, but we're going to be right up there. I am kind of looking at that closer.
For the sake of time, I'm just going to say that I'm open to the concept and looking forward to learning more.
Hello, my name is Brian Wright. I'd like to thank you for being here and attending this forum. I'm a retired firefighter from the city of Muscatine, and I'm also on the Muscatine County Board of Health, and I'm speaking solely on my behalf. I have a question relating to Senate File 535, the fireworks legislation, and House File 2144. It's a consumer fireworks fee fund. When I'm reading this, it appears that it's taking away local control. And I'm curious what your viewpoints are on that. When it first came out, the fireworks, we were overwhelmed with the number of calls. Law enforcement was just, it got out of control. Local control, city councils decided, hey, we need to reduce this in the best interests of our citizens. A lot of things that we hear, I hear, especially our veterans who suffer PTSD and our elderly. This is a significant impact on our communities, and there has to be some measures where local control has to say, hey, we need to limit this. On the other point, on House File 2144, this Consumer Fireworks Fee Fund basically is going to give money back to fire departments, law enforcement, EMS, for equipment and things. I really think this needs to be looked at and say, how can we help our veterans with post-traumatic stress? How can we look at other means of supporting? Our state only has one burn unit, the University of Iowa. It can get overwhelmed easily. So we need to look at other things. I'd just like your viewpoints, what you think on that. Thank you.
So just for everybody's knowledge, when you say like House File 2144, that means that's a 2,144th bill that's been introduced. So I don't know what either of those say, but I will definitely look into them and get back to you.
I would say it is concerning about some of the accidents that we had with fireworks this last time. So, but I will say, though, what was amazing is that all the people that support fireworks, I got overwhelming tons and tons and tons of people that do support them. So, but like I said, and as far as if there's some other bills out there, I haven't seen anything for any changes or anything like that.
Brian, I just want to make sure I got the right numbers. Senate File 353 and House File 2144?
535 for Senate file.
535, okay. I don't have any idea on the Senate bill. On the House bill, I do remember seeing that bill, and it was talking about increasing the amount that the retailers sell on that, a certain percentage of that, to go back to local police and fire, if I recall. I don't know where that bill stands. You know, the question that we had from the young student earlier about the process, whether that one is in the public hearing stage or where that bill will go. The issues about some of the mental health issues and some of the PTSD, that's really over in the human resources budget. I don't see that will necessarily go there. I think the backing behind the bill for more money to go back to the cities is also to be helpful for fireworks administration, legislation, regulation, that type of thing.
What I've heard back from the fireworks bill, that the rural counties have not had this big a problem. So there's a little disconnect, I think, between the cities that are larger than the smaller cities. I mean, even Grandview in my district, Morning Sun, Mediapolis, that they haven't had the problems. And if they did, they was able to solve them, send somebody out and get them stopped, or tell them they need to kind of get back on their own property. Just simple things like that. And as Gary said, though, the vets may be in a different committee to address this situation. But, you know, if we could open it up to vets under that same thing, I don't think any of us are opposed to helping the veterans up here. So it's worth looking at.
You know, I think this is really an issue for the County Board of Supervisors and the City Council members. You know, they're the ones that can say, yes, from this time frame from sunset till midnight or 1 a.m., this is the limit. Anything past that, then it's a violation of city ordinance. So, you know, it is really, the state can say, yes, it is, it's okay, the person can have fireworks, but it's up to the individual municipalities to regulate what days, what time frame.
So wasn't it Muscatine last summer? A guy here blew his hand off with fireworks? Yeah, last July.
Muscatine County ended up having one fatality and one dismemberment. And our local hospital had so many calls. But
people said this was going to happen, and then it happened. You know, so in terms of Senate File 535, that's in the Commerce Committee. I just looked it up. The Iowa Legislature is a great website. If you just search Iowa Legislature, you got any of these bills, you can find draft, you can see what's going on. Just Google Iowa Legislature, and you got a lot of great information on there. The principal architect, the guy who's making all this happen, is named Senator Jake Chapman. Jake lives in Dallas County. Jake, you know, loves fireworks. He also owns an ambulance business, so you do the math. He has assigned himself this bill. I mean, I'm not saying that he's out here saying that he's like trying to make money on ambulance, but like I don't know. It's like I don't get it. He talks about it on the floor all the time, and he's assigned himself this bill. He's given it to him. He's on the Commerce Committee. Well, no, but he's not the chair anymore, but he's on the Commerce Committee. He's got it, and I think Senator Smith gave it to himself, and then he's on the Commerce Committee. So the bill's going to move. I think you just heard from Representative Kerr and Senator Green a great argument in favor of local control, right? It's different in the rural areas than it is in the urban areas. So we shouldn't be trying to legislate this in Des Moines. We should be giving local jurisdictions the ability to make these choices so they can do what's right for them. So, you know, if it comes to the floor, I'll vote against it. This was passed in 2017, 2016, and so, you know, it was before I got there. I don't support it, and so, you know, we'll see what happens. But I think that firefighters like you, other first responders, have been very clear that they're being overwhelmed with calls during the 4th of July holiday. And SF 535, by the way, just so people know what this would do, would remove the licensure requirements that exist to sell fireworks. So currently, if you want to sell consumer fireworks, you got to have a license from the state to do it. This would get rid of that.
No control. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Karen Cooney, and I'm from Muscatine. We have a lot of educators here in the building, and some of you folks on the education area. I myself was just elected to the school board this fall. And one of the first things we did is we were at Des Moines for meetings, and I went through Finance 101. So I can tell you that right away it was very important, as in what are those formulas on how we got our money. And I look at that and I see the translation, what that comes down to, our teachers. We need to be able to fund our teachers and our teachers' salaries in a way that's going to want them to stay in not only Muscatine, but also in Iowa, because some of our surrounding states do some very competitive amounts on what they will hire their teachers for. Our teachers need to feel valid, but our hands sometimes are tied because of some of those things with formula. And then also, I believe several of you talked about declining enrollment and stuff. like as you said, Zach, about the fact that, those 3-year-olds, what they're going to be in 15 years. Well, we look at that. We just had to deal with looking at closing a school because we know of those declining enrollments. So it's tied to a lot of different things on how we deal with our education, of course. But I would like your thoughts on what's happening with that funding and what we can do to make sure that we're securing that the right way.
Karen, thanks for the question. To Melvin's question about how a bill becomes a law, there are a lot of other things that have to happen in order for the government to do its job. We got this thing called the school finance formula that determines how much money is going to each school district. I've had it explained to me a couple of times. I'm on the education committee. Does anyone up here actually fully understand how the formula? I mean, it's really complicated.
It's complicated.
But at the end of the day, the governor put forward, I think, 2.5% for state allowable growth. I would like to see the number be closer to 3% or 4%, but 2.5 would be an increase over last year. I think the House also came out with 2.5, and I think the Senate's at 2.1. So hopefully we get closer to the House number than the Senate number. In terms of kind of where that's going, we last year took another big bite on the transportation equity piece, so this is making sure that more rural school districts are getting funding to offset the cost of busing students further and further. Then the other thing that we're doing is on the equity piece. So currently some districts have higher property taxes. They used to put a little bit more money in per pupil, and we're using state funding to try and equalize that playing field, which I think all of us up here support and have voted for. To your question about kind of the broader, on teachers and what have you, there are a lot of things that we need to be looking at to make sure that we have the number of teachers that we need in the classroom. A huge part of that is funding. But we also know that there are school districts that have money that can't find teachers, that can't recruit teachers. And so, we need to figure out a way. Iowa has some of the most restrictive reciprocity laws for teachers' licenses in the country. And I'm not saying that we need to lower our standards. Iowa does not need to lower our standards. But we do need to make sure that we're not telling someone who has a master's in 20 years of teaching that they need to come take a whole bunch of new classes just because they want to come teach in Iowa. So I'm on the education committee. We're going to take a very close look at that. I don't know what necessarily we're going to land on, but I think that this is something that is on the agenda for Iowa lawmakers. And the last piece I'll mention, I know that school safety has been in the news a lot. Is school safety a topic here in the Muscatine area? I mean, fundamentally, that is a resource and staffing issue. And so if we don't have the staff and the teachers in the classroom, it's harder to keep a classroom safe if you got tons and tons of students in the classroom. So again, you're absolutely on the money. We got to make sure that we have adequate resources from the state.
I think the education of our young children is probably the primary job of our state. 52% of our entire state's budget, $7.6 billion, over 50% goes for education. So I think we more than adequately are funding our education. The biggest thing is it's got to be sustainable and it's got to be predictable. In my Senate district, I have 14 school districts, and all of my superintendents tell me, thank you very much for getting to the number early. Before I got to the Iowa Senate, that was like the last thing that they addressed every year was public education. So our superintendents couldn't set their budget until the end of April. Well, we're going to get them that number early. Sometimes, they say it's not enough, but like Senator Walz says, I think that number will end up closer to 2.5% this year. It was 2.06 last year. So that's really a significant increase that we're going to have, primarily due to the state's growth in revenue. So I see that, like it says, we're going to get that number to our public schools early, and it will be sustainable, and it will be dependable.
Well, again, we're put a package together in the House, and it totals about $108 million more added, which brings the total of funding to about $3.4 billion that we will put into education this year. There is some studies that I've looked at that says retaining teachers, not only in Iowa, but all the surrounding states, has been a challenge. It's just not landing in Iowa. Illinois, I was told a lot of teachers go to Illinois. Well, I looked up online a day or two where the teachers' jobs were in Illinois. They were in the inner cities of the Chicago, St. Louis, Danville, I think, in Danville, Illinois. Those were the areas that they were They can't retain teachers there, and they pay them a higher salary. So it's not an Iowa problem, it's a Midwest problem. Stress, I saw a study, I think I've got it with me. Stress is the number one issue why they quit or don't go into the field after they start their college to find out. And I don't really know if they're even told about the situations that they will be facing once they graduate from college in actual classroom situations. So I think we've done a good job. I hope the Senate brings their numbers up. I think the House version is very adequate. And I also have heard good things throughout my district about 2.5 and 108 million that we will increase. Actually, the 100, by the time we do the supplemental aid, the transportation, and the equity, it really boosts that whole package up to about 2.7, 2.75 or whatever number, but it's really above that 2.5 that's going into K through 12 education.
Karen, I will agree, school formula's difficult to understand. So supplemental state aid talks about as...
I did not go to 102, just so you know.
Yeah. So it's a steady number that every student, what is considered a typical student in that terminology, gets that certain amount. Students that may have English as a second language, students that may have learning disability, there's a factor that goes on top of that. So as the school registers how many students that they have with special needs, for instance, then they get more money on top of that per student that is that way. The issue that we were talking about here on transportation is the fact that school districts are reimbursed at the average cost of transportation per student. But it takes all the transportation costs, does that calculation, what is that average? What we have been working on over the last 2 years, and this will be the third year, is to buy that average down so that every school district is reimbursed really at the same level in their budget. And that's really important for dollars to go into the classroom, because for those school districts whose transportation costs exceeded the average, that really then came out of the general fund. So that is, and so really when we look at money going into the classroom, this transportation equity issue is a big part of that. And based on the discussions we've had in the House, with the extra dollars that we are suggesting go into transportation, we would be at that statewide average for all school districts across the state. And that will continue to be an important part of dollars to really go in for classroom education.
Good.
The House and the Senate are about $16 million apart, so we're at 91.65 million is where we are as far as the Senate, which is 75.7 million as far as supplemental state aid. And this equity piece, a long time ago what happened was they determined about half the districts could tax a certain amount, another could tax a different amount, and we've been dealing with that. That's really still pretty important in Muscatine too. In Davenport schools, if you've heard a lot about them over the years on that. So, but that's 5.8 million to that, and then the transportation is 7.65. Now, I don't think that benefits Muscatine, but L&M, Mike Van Sickle, who's up next year, he cares about that, I'm sure. And then therapeutic classrooms, I talked about earlier, is $2.5 million. So again, we're at 91.65 million. So also, too, I might mention that in Iowa, per student, they get about $15,000 too.
I just want to reframe my answer. People toss around numbers, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%. That seems like a small amount. But we're talking about a percentage of $3.3 billion. So this 2.5% offer, I think, is extremely affordable. It's a $108 million increase on top of a $3.3 billion check that we're already going to write out. So I think you say, where's the state's priorities? There isn't even a close second place when it comes to funding. When you look at a $3.4 billion check to K through 12 public education. And as far as teachers' pay, I did have this statistic looked up by a nonpartisan third party. Iowa average teacher pay right now is $59,222, which is among the highest in the country, and our cost of living is extremely low. I've got 7 public school teachers in my immediate family, so education is also very important to me. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. You all answered that very well. I appreciate that.
Good morning. My name is Mike Van Sickle. I am the superintendent of Louisa Muscatine Schools. So, as many of you representing many areas, I kind of represent two counties. Half of the district will be in Louisa County, half of the district will be in Muscatine County. First of all, I'm going to thank Senator Lofgren for moving forward on some legislation on school safety that has to do with resource officers. To give you a background on that, a couple years ago, we at Louisa Muscatine did a survey in reference to school culture, safety, and those types of things to the community, to the parents, to the staff, to the students. And out of that, there was many suggestions and comments of resource officers in the school. And if you're in a rural school district, it's very difficult to afford that across the state. So I had an idea, and I pitched it to Mark, and he then presented it. It didn't make it out of committee, but I commend him and his colleagues because they were innovative and even came forward with legislation that was even better than originally I suggested. So that is hitting the floor in reference to the funding of resource officers. So I thank you about that. The thing that I'm asking, as you articulated up there very well on how a bill becomes a law, reminds me of Schoolhouse Rock there. We should have a video. But nonetheless, I would ask maybe Congressman Walz and Kerr, I have no idea if it would help the effort, if you would introduce a similar bill on the House side so they can work through that process maybe a little quicker. So in that, I turn over to Mark. Could you potentially give a little bit of background on the bill? And then...
Sure. Mark, before you start, this will be the last question because we're getting close and we need a roundup session from the legislators. So,
well, anyway,
yeah, we have a whole bunch in line, and unless we try to be out of here at 10:30 because many of the legislators have other commitments. So basically, after this question, I think we're going to have to go to the roundup by the legislators.
Okay, this has to do with structural support program. What happens is that 10% of the budget can go towards that, and if there's no problem if you don't spend up to that limit, but if you go under, then you can go ahead and get resource officers and pay for that. What this does is this allows you, if you go past that limit, that you can go ahead and the money for that resource officer and also the equipment and everything too. We are kind of looking at an amendment on the bill, but again, here's what I see as the problem in the rural school districts. When you're in L&M, you're a long ways away from the police department or the sheriff, and so it takes a while to get somebody there. So that's what we talked about that in the subcommittee, that some people thought, what does this really matter? But again, if you're in a rural area, and I think this goes right along with the governor's task force on rural Iowa. I'm on the investment around the task force that we're dealing with rural areas and trying to do things that will help them. So I think we got all that unanimous in the subcommittee, and then I'm pretty sure probably we're going to do the bill in education on Tuesday.
Mike, I thought through the SAVE bill we did last year, I thought you could appropriate money through SAVE. I may be way off on this, but my memory is just that you can do this for funding of a officer.
Not through SAVE.
Not through SAVE. I thought we passed a bill last year that authorized money that could go towards...
you can use at-risk money.
Okay. It would have to come, right now we're coming up against the first funnel. It would have to be a committee bill, and I think it would be tough to get it unless we just take marks and present it.
I was just asking.
I'm not against it. I'm not saying that, but got like a lot of bills, long time to get there and a short time. Oh, yeah, if it passes out of the Senate, it will come to the House. Right. Thank you for that. I forgot about. See, I forgot about that. It has to go back and forth.
The good thing about the bill is that Amy Sinclair is the chair of education, and she put the bill in. So I'm sure. She'll support the bill. I'm sure we'll get out of the Senate and so we have you guys primed when it gets over there. Okay.
And I may add, if anybody wants a little in-service on school finance, you can talk to me about that.
we have two choices. Either the legislators can have their closing remarks, or you can waive closing remarks, and we'll take one more questioner. What's your pleasure, gentlemen? Yeah. You know, I guess we're going to close up. So that's the last. That's the last question. So
we'll come catch you afterward. Yeah, I'm willing to stay. For anybody that was in line, just come see me afterward. I'd be happy to answer the question.
Okay.
Any questions you got?
Okay. So Bobby, you want to do the first close-up since you got the mic?
Yeah, anybody that was in line that has a question, I will be right here. Just come up here, and after we're done, happy to answer any and all of them. Other people have forums to get to, is why we were hesitant to keep with the question, but I'll be happy to answer every single one of them. The main thing I want to close with is that, and I close this way at most of my forums, Des Moines is not Washington, D.C. We are forced to get along. We actually kind of like each other. I consider Senator Walz a friend. We sit like this close to each other, so it's kind of hard at the Capitol to hate each other. There are some people that make it particularly hard not to dislike them, but we try. 90% of the bills that passed and became law last year had a significant bipartisan vote. So most of the time, a supermajority of the time, we work together and we get along. Yes, it makes the news when we have disagreements on a hot topic, but even at the committee level, I'll give you an example with my committee. 31 bills came out of the state government committee. 28 of those had a bipartisan vote and 24 became law. So we do work together, we do get along, we do function, we do pass budgets, and we don't have multiple exorbitant pay packages. So I just want to leave that with you, that Des Moines is not D.C. I know that not a lot of you are my constituents, but don't hesitate to reach out. I've got a Facebook page, I've got email, cell phone. Don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions. I know many of you in the crowd do that already, and I look forward to communicating. I know Sarah, I always hear from Sarah Landy. Love to hear from you, so don't hesitate to keep that up.
Senator Walz sits right next to me. In fact, he's to the left of me, which makes a lot of sense. So, but I might mention too, if you send emails, it's, you know, there's just candid emails that go out. But if you send your personal email, a little story about kind of what's going on, then we really care, you know, in that situation. But if it's just one of the ones that's kind of floating around, like I said, we try to respond and everything. But I think a personal email is very helpful.
Yeah, I would agree with Mark. A personal email, you can get a response and you understand the issue. When you get the same email 250 times, I may be helpful to read it once or twice or three times, but 250 times, it's not getting read. Okay, and that's what happens. You get slammed with these things, and they're really not effective. When you personalize it, it makes a big difference. Just switch gears. Just remind everybody, this is a busy weekend, and on Monday are the caucuses. A lot of you are active, or you wouldn't be out here. You're interested in what's taking place, and so both the Democratic caucus and Republican caucuses take place. If you're not sure exactly where you go, you might go on the state's website, Secretary of State's website, which is sos.iowa, IOWA spelled out, .gov, and you can look up every county and in whatever precinct you're in. It'll tell you where to go. So I'd encourage you all to participate in the caucuses on Monday.
Well, again, thank everyone for coming out today. I just want to touch on a couple comments, and Senator Walz kind of spurred my memory on these. There's conversations about enrollment sizes, or declining enrollment in rural schools, community colleges, the universities, the regents, all are, enrollments are down, and not that we can do anything about that, but there's some concerns that are coming on the horizon about those enrollments and funding that would be going along with them. He also mentioned, we mentioned up here today, last dollar scholarship. A year ago, there was a gap when we put the bill out for 19-year-olds. I believe you touched on it. The College Student Aid and those who are responsible for that tried to address it. They have, but there's still some thoughts that it did not really answer the total part of that question. I know it's a little complicated, but if you're facing that, you may not qualify for it, but hopefully under the new rules you will, if you ever 19 and couldn't qualify for it just out of high school. And also we realize, and I funded more of Early Childhood Iowa, the importance of getting a child headed on the right track at a younger age and getting them ready for school, and it helps at age 3 to 5. It's proven that when you're 18, hopefully when you're 17, 18, that early education has paid its way in helping you out in your school studies and the direction you want to take in your life.
One subject that was not brought up today was the high cost of medicine, pharmacy, insulin. I mean, those are problems that affect every one of us here, every one of us. To spend $300 for a 10cc bottle of insulin is exorbitant, and we've got to do something about that. I do want to commend Representative Kaufman was recognized by the Iowa Pharmacy Association as the outstanding legislator for health care issues. Bobby's going after the PBMs, which is actually the pharmacy benefit manager, the middleman in delivery of your copays and your insurance and that. And they jack up the cost of that net that's coming to the consumer. And Bobby is all over this issue. And he's spoken to me about it many times, and I'm confident that he's going to take some very positive steps that will be beneficial to every one of us.
Thank you, Senator. I'll close by also echoing Representative Kaufman's point about the fact that Washington, D.C. and Des Moines are very much not the same place. I will also say that my remark earlier about Senator Chapman, we have a rule in the Senate, Rule 9, you're not supposed to impugn the motives of other senators. So Senator Chapman, if you're watching at home, I do apologize. I was out of line. I shouldn't have impugned his motives about the ambulance piece like that. But I will say Senator Chapman and I do work together on other pieces of legislation. We are 2 of the Senate's only 3 Eagle Scouts. But we do get really passionate about this stuff. We get really fired up about issues that we care about. And I know that we also have to be the change that we want to see. That's why I have been working hard to be bipartisan in the work that I do. Just next week I'll be participating with Representative Joe Mitchell, who's a Republican down in Mount Pleasant, after the caucuses are over in a red and blue event in Iowa City, which is actually hosted by former Republican nominee for Congressional District 2, Christopher Peters, to try and talk about some of the differences that we have on these issues. And there were a lot of things that we didn't talk about today, and there are things that we do have disagreements on, things like protecting a woman's access to health care, making her own decisions about her own body, which is going to be, it looks like a big issue that the legislature has coming up. But there are also things that, like Representative Kerr just said, that we do have a lot of agreement on, things like child care, early childhood education, and things like restoring the voting rights of felons. Iowa is now the only state in America where we do not automatically begin that process once someone has paid their debt to society. So my hope is that even though we do have some disagreements, and even though we see a lot of issues very differently, the legislature will be able to get some good things done for the people of Iowa and really deliver on some good bipartisan work this year. So I'm leaving a stack of business cards up here. I also am running to another event this afternoon, but I would be happy to chat with anybody who didn't have a chance to ask a question. And if I don't get a chance to talk with you, please come up, grab a business card, and I will echo Representative Carlson's piece. If you're going to email us, please make it personal, and don't just do one of those click on one button and send an email to your legislator. I do try to respond to those, but boy, we get a lot of them. So thank you all very much. Definitely caucus if you can, and travel safely, everybody.
We're now adjourned.